Sir, step out of the vehicle. You have warrants out of Louisiana. Louisiana? I've never even been to Louisiana. That's not what the system says.
Would you pay $200,000 for an algorithm's mistake? Because the taxpayers of Jefferson Parish, Louisiana just did. The man pulled over on that Georgia interstate was on his way to his mother's house for Thanksgiving. He had done nothing wrong. He had never committed a crime in Louisiana. He had never even set foot in Louisiana. But a facial recognition system said it was him. A detective trusted the algorithm over the evidence. And a 29-year-old black man spent 6 days in a jail cell over a crime he could not possibly have committed, while his family sat around a Thanksgiving table with an empty chair. In the next minutes, you are going to see exactly how this happened. The specific moment the algorithm failed. The specific decision a detective made to hide how he got there. And the receipt, every dollar of it, that Jefferson Parish handed to taxpayers when it settled rather than face what that detective actually did. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from. And hit subscribe, because we follow the technology, we follow the cover-up, and we follow the money. Stay with me, because the cover-up in this story is worse than the arrest. Randall Reid goes by Karan. He was 29 years old in November 2022. He lived in Georgia, had always lived in Georgia. He had a job, a family, a life built entirely in the Atlanta area. He had plans for Thanksgiving weekend. Simple plans. Drive to his mother's home outside Atlanta. Eat. Rest. Be with family. The kind of plans that define a holiday weekend for millions of Americans every year. He had no criminal record in Louisiana. No connection to Louisiana. No reason to ever have been in Louisiana. If you had asked him where Jefferson Parish was before that Friday afternoon, he would have told you honestly, he had no idea. On November 25th, 2022, the day after Thanksgiving, Karan Reid got into his white Jeep and started the drive to his mother's house. He merged onto a busy Georgia interstate. Traffic was moving. The holiday weekend was underway. Then he saw the lights in his rearview mirror. And everything about that Thanksgiving weekend changed in an instant. The officer who pulled Karan over told him he had active warrants. 2 of them. Both issued by parishes in Louisiana, Jefferson Parish and East Baton Rouge Parish. The alleged crime, a stolen credit card, had been used to buy 2 designer purses worth over $8,000 from a consignment store outside New Orleans back in June 2022. Karan looked at the officer. He said, "Where is Jefferson Parish?" Because he had genuinely never heard of it. The officer told him it was in Louisiana. Karan said he had never been to Louisiana. The officer said that was not what the system said. The system. Not a witness. Not physical evidence. Not a fingerprint or a DNA match or a single document placing Karan Reid inside the state of Louisiana. A system. Running an algorithm. That had taken surveillance footage from a store outside New Orleans and matched it to a motor vehicle department photo of a 29-year-old man in Georgia who was on his way to his mother's house. Karan was handcuffed on the side of a busy Georgia interstate on the day after Thanksgiving. He was taken to DeKalb County Jail to await extradition to Louisiana. He asked his jailers why he was being held. They told him, "You've got to wait for Louisiana to come take you." There was no timeline on that. His family spent Thanksgiving weekend scrambling to find a lawyer, making calls, trying to prove that a man who had never left Georgia had somehow committed a crime there. He told the officer he had never been to Louisiana. He said it on the side of the highway. He said it in the jail. His entire life history was in Georgia. A basic records check would have confirmed it immediately. The detective never ran one. At what point do you think this became a civil rights violation? Drop your answer in the comments right now. But here is where this story goes from a tragic mistake to something far more deliberate. Because when the detective in Jefferson Parish wrote the affidavit to get the warrant that put Karan Reid in handcuffs on a Georgia interstate, he left something out. Detective Andrew Bartholomew of the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office had used a facial recognition system called Clearview AI to match the surveillance footage from the consignment store to Karan Reid's motor vehicle department photograph. That match, from a technology documented to have higher error rates for black faces, was the entire basis for the warrant. Here is what Bartholomew wrote in the affidavit he submitted to the judge who signed that warrant: that he had been advised by a credible source that one of the suspects in the video was Karan Reid. A credible source. Not a facial recognition algorithm. Not Clearview AI. Not a technology with documented racial bias that has been responsible for multiple wrongful arrests of black men across the United States. Just a credible source. The judge who signed the warrant had no idea he was authorizing an arrest based on a facial recognition match. The warrant application gave him no way to know. The technology was hidden behind 3 words that implied a human informant with first-hand knowledge. And then, crucially, Bartholomew did not conduct even a basic investigation into Karan Reid before seeking that warrant. The lawsuit filed on Reid's behalf states this plainly. A basic search would have revealed that Reid was in Georgia when the theft occurred. His phone records, his employment records, any digital footprint at all, none of it was checked. A man was jailed for 6 days on a warrant obtained by hiding the method, skipping the verification, and trusting an algorithm over a human being who said clearly, "I have never been to that state." 6 days. That is how long Karan Reid spent in a DeKalb County jail cell waiting for Louisiana to either come get him or drop the warrant. 6 days of his family working the phones, his parents making calls they should never have had to make, lawyers scrambling to pierce through a warrant application that had hidden the technology at its core. 6 days of Karan sitting in a cell knowing he was innocent, knowing he had never been to Louisiana, knowing that somewhere in a Georgia jail system had decided he was someone he was not. He missed work. He missed his family. He sat with the particular terror of a man who knows the truth and cannot make the system hear it. When the warrant was finally rescinded and he walked out of that jail, he said something that has stayed with everyone who has reported this story since. He said, "Every time I see police in my rearview mirror, it just flashes back to what could have happened, even though I hadn't done anything." And now here is the part that connects Karan Reid's story to something much larger than one detective in one Louisiana parish. Because Karan Reid was not the only one. When Karan Reid filed his lawsuit in 2023, investigators and journalists began pulling on the thread. What they found was that the same Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office had issued similar warrants in other cases. The same pattern, facial recognition match, credible source in the affidavit, no corroborating evidence, no independent verification. Karan was not the only person arrested on a Louisiana warrant tied to that same consignment store theft. Other black individuals had also been swept up. All of them had been identified through facial recognition. None of the warrant affidavits mention the technology by name. The ACLU, which has been tracking wrongful arrests caused by facial recognition technology since Robert Williams's case in 2020, now documents more than a dozen confirmed wrongful arrests across the United States linked to this technology. Every single documented case involves a black or brown person. Not one involves a white person. This is not a coincidence. It is a mathematical consequence of a technology trained on datasets that underrepresented people of color. producing a tool that is demonstrably less accurate for the very population most likely to be targeted by the stops and surveillance that feeded images in the first place. Karan Reid was not an edge case. He was a documented data point in a pattern that law enforcement agencies across this country are still using, still expanding, and still, in some jurisdictions, still hiding. Karan Reid filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office in 2023. The complaint named Detective Bartholomew and Sheriff Joe Lapinto. It alleged false arrest, malicious prosecution, negligence, and violation of his constitutional rights. At the center of it, the assertion that the department had no formal policies, no training protocols, and no oversight framework governing the use of facial recognition technology, even though it had been using it since at least 2019. For years of using a technology known to produce racially biased results. No policies, no training, no requirement to disclose it in warrant applications, no requirement to verify its results before arresting a human being. In May 2025, Jefferson Parish settled $200,000, paid by taxpayers, not by Detective Bartholomew, not by Sheriff Lapinto, by the people of Jefferson Parish, Louisiana, who funded a department that used an unregulated algorithm to put an innocent man in jail for 6 days, and then hid how it did it from the judge who signed the warrant. That is the receipt. That is the cost of no policies, no training, and 3 words, credible source, standing in for the truth. $200,000 settled out of federal court. The detective who hid the facial recognition from the warrant still has his job. The department still uses the technology. Do you think that is justice? Or is that a $200,000 permission slip to do it again? Drop your answer below. Let me tell you what Karan Reid's story is really about. It is not just about a flawed algorithm. We covered that with Robert Williams. The algorithm failing is the beginning, not the story. The story here is what the detective did after the algorithm gave him a result. He did not verify it. He did not cross-check it. He did not run a basic record search that would have placed Karan Reid in Georgia on the day of the crime. He took the algorithm's output, called it a credible source, and submitted it to a judge as the foundation for 2 arrest warrants. That is not a technology failure. That is a human being making choices. The choice to trust a machine over evidence. The choice to skip the verification that would have prevented the arrest. The choice to hide the method in the paperwork. 3 choices, each one deliberate, each one undocumented until a lawsuit forced the documentation into the open. Karan Reid was on his way to his mother's house for Thanksgiving. He had turkey to eat and family to see and a weekend ahead of him that looked exactly like the weekends of millions of Americans that same Friday. He had done nothing wrong. He had never been to Louisiana. He told the officer that immediately and clearly. It did not matter, because the system said otherwise. And the system, in this case, was an algorithm that a detective had decided was more credible than a 29-year-old black man telling the truth on the side of a Georgia interstate. Karan Reid spent 6 days in jail for a crime committed in a state he had never visited. The algorithm that put him there is still running. The department that used it without oversight settled for $200,000 and went back to work. If this story alarmed you, hit that like button and share this video. Share it with everyone you know who has ever been pulled over, ever been stopped, ever sat in a car and felt their stomach drop at the sight of blue lights. Because what happened to Karan Reid can happen anywhere this technology is used without oversight. Drop a comment. Did you know facial recognition warrants were being hidden from judges? And do you think departments that use this technology should be required to disclose it in every warrant application? Tell me below. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we follow the body cam footage, the lawsuits, and the receipts that departments pay when they get caught. We make sure the stories that settle quietly don't disappear quietly. We'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp out there, and remember, when the system puts you in a cage and calls it a credible source, the truth is still the truth. And eventually, with the right lawyer and the right lawsuit, the truth always costs somebody something.